The night sky had always been a place of comfort for humanity, a canvas of eternal stars stretching above them, a reminder that no matter how small they were, the universe was vast and endless, yet in a single week that comfort shattered constellations. That had guided sailors for centuries vanished, whole clusters of stars blinked out as if erased by an invisible hand. Telescopes across the world confirmed the impossible. It was not clouds or shifting skies. It was not the natural death of suns. The stars themselves were gone, swallowed by something no one could explain. Panic spread quickly. Scientists fought to understand the mystery. Some said a chain of black holes had drifted into the galactic rim. Others believed vast walls of cosmic dust had blocked the starlight, but the truth was far stranger and far more terrifying. High above Earth, military satellites observed the dark sectors where light had vanished. The cameras caught images that should never have existed, shadows moving. Between the stars, colossal shapes longer than cities drifting with purpose, their outlines bending the light around them as if the void itself served them. No two images were the same. Some appeared like serpents coiling through space, others like vast wings unfurling in silence, their forms blurred as though reality could not hold them. Yet their presence was undeniable. Humanity was not alone, and whatever moved out there was feeding on the heavens. At the United Nations, an emergency council was held, every leader pale and restless, as streams of data filled the great screens. The scientists struggled to remain calm, but their voices cracked as they explained the rate of disappearance, whole constellations erased in days as though devoured. One by one, the mathematicians projected that if the pattern continued within a decade, the galaxy itself would fall into shadow. The leaders argued, was it an invasion? Should they send messages of peace? Should Earth prepare for war? Yet no one could decide because no one knew what they faced. Still, the military pressed forward, releasing blurred satellite footage to the room, and silence followed across the chamber. Every person frozen by the same vision, a star disappearing into the coils of a shadow. While the world argued, something ancient stirred far below their feet, buried beneath miles of ice in Antarctica. Earthquakes rippled across the frozen continent, cracks splitting the white surface as though the ground itself was waking. Strange vibrations pulsed through the earth, picked up by seismographs worldwide. At first mistaken for natural tremors until the rhythm repeated every hour, steady like a heartbeat. Teams were sent to investigate, and what they found defied reason. Beneath the ice lay a structure of impossible size. Not a mountain, not a cave, but a shape. Two precise, two deliberate sharp angles of black stone and metal fused together a design that predated any known civilization. The explorers lowered lights into the cavern, only for the stone itself to respond, glowing faintly with veins of fire stretching across the walls like blood rushing through a giant body. The more they studied, the more their instruments failed. Compasses spun wildly, radios filled with static, and men swore they heard whispers in the air, voices speaking words no one understood. And yet the meaning sank deep into their bones, a warning or a call. They could not tell, but fear settled over them, stronger than the frozen wind days. Days passed, and the stars continued to vanish. The military expanded their presence around the Antarctic anomaly. Vast tents and armored vehicles lined the ice satellites above, redirected to watch the region, but none of it mattered when the structure began to move. The ice shook, splitting open for miles as shards. The size of towers cracked and fell into the sea. From the depths rose a shape more terrifying than any machine humanity had ever built, a guardian forged of stone and metal, a figure, taller than mountains, its surface alive with glowing veins, its eyes two burning suns that cut through the storm. For a long moment it stood silent, its massive head tilting as though listening to something distant. Then it looked upward past the Clouds passed the sky, straight into the cold abyss of space where the shadows drifted. The soldiers on the ground froze. Weapons trembling in their hands, some whispered it was salvation. Others whispered it was doom. But before anyone could speak, the Guardian raised its arm and the very air rippled. A pulse of energy erupted into the sky, sending shock waves through the atmosphere. Satellites went blind, instruments overloaded, and for a moment every screen on Earth flickered with the same impossible image. The Guardian's burning gaze fixed on the stars, as though it had seen the predators before, as though it had been waiting. The world held its breath, watching through broken feeds, through static screens, hearts racing, because deep down, they all felt it. This was not the first time this battle had begun, and Earth was no longer an observer in the galaxy. It had just awakened something that remembered the shadows, something built to stand against them. But the question that filled every trembling mind was not whether it would fight the darkness, it was whether it still remembered how to protect, or if, like the stars, it too had been consumed by the endless void now approaching. The ice had not stopped breaking since the Guardian rose. The frozen continent trembled, as if rejecting the presence that had slept beneath it for countless ages. Cracks spread across glaciers, swallowing whole research stations and sending massive waves into the sea. Helicopters circled at a distance, their cameras straining to capture the impossible. A titan forged of metal and stone, standing taller than any human creation, its body glowing with rivers of molten light, running across plates that looked older than mountains. Every movement it made was slow, deliberate, yet heavy enough to shake the air itself. Soldiers on the ground stood rooted to their positions, their weapons useless in their hands, their eyes wide with the same question. Was it here to protect them or destroy them? Around the world news feeds burned with live footage. Despite the military's attempt to control the leaks, billions watched screens in silence as the figure's face came into full view. Twin orbs of burning light that resembled suns, each one pulsing. Brighter with every passing second, then came the sound, a low thunder that rolled across the globe. The Guardian was not speaking in words, but in something older, something that bypassed ears and entered the bones of every human alive. Children cried out, unable to understand why they felt the voice in their skulls, while the elderly whispered prayers. Leaders demanded translations. But no scientist could give one because there was nothing to decode. And yet everyone understood the meaning deep down. It was awakening. Not for Earth, but for something beyond. The United Nations chamber collapsed into chaos. Generals demanded immediate action while scientists begged for more time. The Guardian's sudden rise coincided perfectly with the vanishing stars, and no one could deny the timing. Leaders feared it might signal the very predators consuming the galaxy. Others argued it was the only weapon humanity had a relic left for this exact moment. Admiral Pierce, one of the youngest commanders in the fleet, slammed his hand against the table and declared that whatever the thing was, Earth could not ignore it if the shadows were indeed coming. Then hesitation was death. His voice carried through the chamber, igniting more fear and more argument, until finally silence fell when the lights flickered. Screens across the room filled with static. Then an image broadcast from military satellites appeared, an image that froze every mouth mid-sentence. The Guardian's eyes had turned outward toward space, and the satellites caught the reflection of something vast in their burning glow. For the first time, the predators were visible to human instruments, not as shapes in shadow, but as living ships, enormous bodies stretching for kilometers. Their surfaces glistening like scales, coils of black material wrapped around themselves as if they were serpents swimming through a sea of stars, each one pulsing as it drained the light from the heavens. Scientists gasped. Admiral Pierce whispered only one word: invasion, and the chamber erupted again. Meanwhile, back in Antarctica, the Guardian moved for the first time with true purpose. Its colossal frame groaned as it bent its knees, the ground collapsing under its weight. Then, with a surge of light blasting from its body, it launched upward into the sky-breaking sound and cloud. In a single heartbeat, shockwaves spread across the continent, sending soldiers tumbling, helicopters spinning, and the sea roaring. The world watched as the Guardian pierced the atmosphere, trailing fire like a rising sun, and entered orbit above Earth. Satellites tried to track it, but their systems overloaded, their signals scrambled. As if the Guardian itself disrupted their machines in orbit, it spread its arms wide, and lines of pure light extended from its body, creating an immense lattice of energy around the planet, forming something that looked both like a shield and a signal. Across the globe, humans felt the same strange sensation again. The voice in their bones, only now stronger, faster, like the beating of a war drum. The Guardian was not hiding, it was calling, and the universe was listening. Admiral Pierce ordered fleets to high alert, knowing instinctively that whatever was being summoned was already close, and then came the proof. Outer satellites orbiting near Jupiter captured them, ships sliding from the void, black leviathans, longer than cities, approaching with terrible silence. The predators had arrived. The first strike had given humanity a taste of hope. The Guardian's fire had torn through the predator ship as if it were made of smoke, its colossal body collapsing into nothingness and leaving only a fading shadow behind. But that hope was crushed. The instant the stars bent again, revealing more of the monstrous fleet, the predators slid from the void one after another, their bodies twisting and rippling with movements that made no sense to the human eye. They had no engines, no wings, no visible weapons. Yet their presence warped reality. The light of distant planets drained into their forms as though the universe itself was their fuel. And this time there were dozens. The people of Earth stood transfixed, watching through broadcasts and grainy feeds, unable to look away, because for the first time in history, their sky was no longer theirs. Admiral Pierce felt the weight of it in his chest. His fleets were ready, his ships bristling with weapons. But what could steel and fire do against creatures that devoured Starlight? He clenched his fists, because even as the Guardian hovered above Earth, glowing like a living sun, he knew deep down one being could not stop an entire armada. The predators moved in silence. They did not signal, they did not communicate. They only advanced. The first wave slithered forward, dark coils stretching across the vacuum, their forms glinting with an oily sheen. Then the nearest one lunged a strike so fast it blurred through space, aiming not for Earth, but for the Guardian. The Titan raised its arm, a wall of light erupting from its body. The two forces collided in a silent explosion that lit up the orbit like a second dawn. Soldiers and civilians alike shielded their eyes. But the Guardian did not falter, its burning gaze locked on the swarm with the patience of something that had waited millennia to fight again. Beams of pure fire erupted from its chest, slicing into the creatures. One fell, then another. But the swarm was relentless. They did not scream, they did not retreat. They only twisted forward, shadows wrapping around the light, trying to suffocate it. On Earth, shockwaves rattled through the atmosphere as fragments of energy cascaded down like meteors. Entire cities lit up with false auroras that burned red and gold. The people cheered every time a predator fell, but their voices trembled because for every shadow destroyed, 3 more appeared. Admiral Pierce barked orders, deploying the fleets. Earth ships roared into the sky, breaking from orbit stations and moon bases. Swarms of fighters streaked upward, missiles armed, railguns loaded. The Guardians. Battle was no longer its alone. Humanity would fight, even if their weapons were like pebbles against a storm. The first human volleys cut through the void, missiles arcing across the darkness, their warheads exploding against the predators. The results were mixed. Some shadows recoiled, stunned, as if the explosions disrupted their feeding. Others ignored the strikes. completely moving through the blasts as though fire was nothing more than mist. Still, it was enough to prove they were not untouchable. Humanity's weapons may have been small, but not useless. The predators retaliated, their bodies shimmering before, releasing pulses of pure darkness, invisible waves that slammed into the human fleets. Entire squadrons went silent, their ships drifting powerless through the void as life support failed. Alarms blared across command centers. Men and women screamed. Through radios before static swallowed their voices, Admiral Pierce gritted his teeth watching lights on his tactical screens vanish by the dozens. But then came a miracle. The Guardian shifted, one massive hand sweeping across the orbit, and a flare of energy erupted like a tidal wave, engulfing the disabled ships. Their systems flickered back to life as though the Titan's light had reignited them. Pierce whispered a silent thanks before commanding his fleets to regroup. Humanity was not alone, as long as the Guardian stood. But the battle was far from victory, for the swarm pressed harder, surrounding Earth on all sides, their bodies closing in like a tightening noose. More stars vanished from the sky as their numbers swelled. The Guardian roared again, its thunder shaking the bones of every living soul, and released another storm of fire. Entire arcs of energy swept through the heavens, consuming predators in a chain reaction of burning shadows. Yet for everyone destroyed, more continued to come, spilling into the solar system like an endless tide. It became clear this was not just a battle, this was the beginning of a war. On the ground, fear mixed with awe. Cities fell silent as people gathered in streets to watch the night sky glow. With fire and shadow, prayers rose from churches, mosques, temples, voices trembling yet filled with stubborn resolve. Children clutched their parents, while old veterans muttered that if the Guardian could stand, so would humanity, even in the face of darkness. Whispers spread that perhaps this was not the first time Earth had been protected. Perhaps long ago, their ancestors had seen the same war and left the Guardian as a shield hidden in the ice, waiting for this very moment. As the battle raged, Admiral Pierce's eyes fixed on a growing shadow larger than the rest. It moved slower, more deliberate, its body dwarfing even the Guardian itself. Sensors struggled to measure it, but estimates placed it at the size of a small moon. It had not joined the fight yet. It only drifted in silence, watching as though commanding the swarm. Pierce felt the blood drain from his face. This was no ordinary predator. This was their leader, and it had not yet revealed its strength. He realized the first waves had been nothing more than a test, and the true battle was still to come. Humanity's fate rested not only on the Guardian's strength, but on whether they could stand long enough to face the darkness that had consumed the stars. Swarm pressed harder, waves of darkness crashing against the Guardian's light. The space around Earth became a storm of fire shadow and broken steel. Human ships darted through the chaos, missiles streaking, railguns hammering, while the Guardian's colossal form burned brighter with every strike. Yet, even as dozens of predator beasts were torn apart, something deeper stirred from the void. A silence heavier than sound, a weight that pressed into the hearts of every living soul. Admiral Pierce watched the tactical screens and felt the air leave his lungs. The massive shadow he had seen earlier was moving. At last, sensors struggled to capture its true size. Its form stretching so far it seemed endless. It glided with terrible grace toward Earth. The smaller predators shifted their paths, moving aside like soldiers parting before a king, and the battlefield itself seemed to bow. The leader had arrived. It did not strike with claws or fangs. Instead, its entire body rippled, and the stars themselves blinked out around it within seconds. Entire constellations vanished as though erased from existence. The humans on the ground gasped, staring at the night sky where familiar lights were gone forever. Scientists in command centers shouted about impossible readings, gravity, bending time, twisting instruments, failing. Yet the truth was clear: the creature was feeding faster than any before, and it was not draining just distant stars. It was reaching toward the Guardian itself. The Titan's blazing form flickered for the first time, beams of fire sputtering as if pulled inward. The leader was not only consuming Starlight, it was consuming the Guardian. The reaction was immediate. The Titan let out a roar that shook the planet the ground. Trembled oceans surged and glass shattered in cities thousands of miles away as the Guardian launched forward with a fury that eclipsed everything seen before its body erupted in rivers of molten light, arcs of pure energy crackling across the heavens. It struck the leader with a blast brighter than the sun itself. The darkness shredded away in layers peeling like skin from the beast's body. Fragments of shadow scattered and evaporated, but the leader did not fall. Instead, it writhed, then expanded larger, darker. Its wounds knitting shut as though they had never been. Admiral Pierce's blood ran cold. Humanity's strongest weapon had just unleashed its full might, and the leader had endured. Around Earth, panic surged, but so did defiance. Every commander, every soldier watching the feed understood the meaning. They could not sit back and let the Guardian fight alone. Pierce gave the order, his voice steady. Despite the fear in his veins, every ship, every gun, every fighter was. To strike at once, missiles arced, railguns thundered, lasers cut across the black sky in a unified assault. The heavens lit with human firepower explosions, tearing against the swarm of predators, distracting them from the Guardian for precious moments. The leader's massive coils rippled as if annoyed by the stings of humanity's weapons. Then it struck back. Waves of shadow erupted outward, swallowing human fleets. Entire squadrons vanished into silence. Ships shredded as though crumpled by an unseen hand. Commanders screamed orders. Fighters spiraled out of control, and still, Pierce shouted for them to hold the line. The Guardian seized the opening, surging through the darkness, its titanic fists colliding with the leader. Each strike thundered. Across space ripples, shaking the orbits of moons. Energy waves lighting the void like storms on a galactic scale. The beast retaliated, coiling around the Guardian, its body wrapping like a serpent, constricting the Titan of light. The two forces clashed, their power tearing reality itself apart. Entire sensors went blind, screens filled with static, and still the world watched, frozen, unable to breathe, as their protector was smothered by the greatest predator. The Guardian's blazing body dimmed, shadows crushing tighter, until for the first time the Titan faltered, sinking toward Earth like a wounded star. The battlefield above Earth had turned into a graveyard of shattered ships and burning fragments of shadow drifting endlessly through the void, yet no one on the ground could look away from the live feeds. Every eye watched the Guardian's blazing form, still standing though, scarred, its chest cord dimming and brightening like a heart struggling to beat the leader. Predator writhed in the distance, its body fractured but far from destroyed, and around it the swarm coiled like a living storm. Admiral Pierce stood at the center of the command chamber, his jaw set, his face lined with exhaustion, as voices shouted around him, reports of fallen fleets, dead crews, crippled colonies across the solar system, panic building every second. But Pierce refused to break, because he knew one truth. If humanity lost here, they would never get another chance. He ordered silence across the room, then gave his command. Humanity was no longer fighting as scattered fleets. They were going to fight as one. The Earth Defense Alliance would form its first true unified counterattack. The men and women around him listened, their fear steadying as his words poured out. They would not abandon the Guardian. They would not retreat into shadows. The predator swarm had to learn that humanity was not prey, and Pierce swore on every lost life that they would prove it. Scientists rushed forward with desperate theories, explaining how the predators absorbed light and energy, but also revealing a weakness in the chaos. Fragments of destroyed predators had been recovered by automated drones and analyzed quickly. The shadows, when torn apart, left behind an afterglow, a residue of strange radiation that flickered like embers. The theory was simple. If that energy could be harnessed, human weapons could be amplified to pierce the predator hides. Pierce seized on it immediately, authorizing a crash program engineers reconfiguring missiles, railgun slugs, and even small fighter cannons to carry captured fragments. The plan was reckless. It was desperate. It was all they had. While ships rearmed, humanity's fleets pulled back into tighter formations around Earth, fighting defensively, while the Guardian clashed once more with the leader predator, the Titans. Light dimmed and flared its body, slamming against the dark coils again and again, bursts of fire and shadow carving across the sky. Even from the ground, people could see it like a second sun rising and falling, each strike shaking their souls. Meanwhile, across cities, bases, and colonies, humanity braced billions of people watching the skies with clenched fists, children holding radios to their chests, elders whispering stories that perhaps their ancestors had faced such nightmares long ago and left. The Guardian to them, mothers and fathers, telling their children to remember this night that humanity stood shoulder to shoulder with something far older, far stronger, and refused to surrender when the first rearmed fleets launched their weapons, streaked across the void, glowing with a new, strange aura. The moment they struck the nearest predators, the results were undeniable. The shadows recoiled, burning with a brightness that clung to their bodies, spreading like wildfire. Human weapons had finally drawn blood in a way that mattered. The swarm screeched, their movements chaotic for the first time. Some broke formations, stumbling through the void as pieces of their bodies ignited with the strange residue emboldened humanity pressed. The attack coordinated squadrons, striking in waves, covering each other, railgun slugs piercing through predator hides, missiles detonating with unnatural brilliance, explosions spreading like miniature suns that lingered in the dark. Admiral Pierce's voice thundered across the comms, driving his forces forward with every order: fight for Earth, fight for every fallen ship, fight, because humanity was not prey. Not anymore. The Guardian itself responded to the shift, its dimming chest flaring brighter. As though fueled by humanity's defiance, it fought harder, faster, its blazing fists colliding with the leader, sending arcs of fire rippling across the swarm. Every predator destroyed. Now left glowing fragments, and human ships swooped in, harvesting them in mid-battle, feeding the weapons of their allies, turning death into firepower for the living. For the first time since the war began, Earth was not merely surviving, it was striking back. The people below erupted in cheers, even as the skies burned, for they could feel it. Hope was no longer a dream. It was real. It was burning. But the leader predator was not blind to what was happening. Its vast coils stirred its broken body, gathering itself, shadows spilling from its wounds, thickening into armor. Its form becoming even darker, even larger. It turned its full attention on Earth, ignoring the Guardian. For a single dreadful moment, the swarm obeyed, parting like curtains to open a path, and then the leader lunged, releasing a wave of pure darkness that cascaded toward the planet's sensors, screamed alarms across every command station. People screamed as night itself seemed to descend in an instant. But before the wave struck, the Guardian intercepted its body, slamming into the darkness, its chest flaring brighter than a sun. The shock wave ripped across space, shaking Earth to its core. Admiral Pierce stared at the screens and felt the truth claw into his mind. The leader was evolving, adapting. Every strike only made it stronger. The swarm endless. The Guardian powerful but not invincible. Humanity had found a way to fight, but the war was just beginning, and the predators were preparing something far worse. The Admiral straightened his uniform and gave the order to his people. Brace for what comes next. Because Earth's first counterattack had worked, but the predators had only begun to reveal their true strength, and the night sky promised battles that would decide the fate of every living thing under the stars. The night sky over Earth no longer looked like the heavens of old. It was a battlefield, scarred with fire and shadow. The wreckage of shattered ships floated like broken bones across the void, while fragments of predators burned with strange ember light, leaving streaks across the darkness. Humanity had struck back for the first time, and the world rejoiced. But celebration was brief because the Predator leader was not defeated. It was changing deep within the black coils that stretched like a continent. Across the stars, something stirred, something ancient and cold, and when it emerged, humanity's fragile hope trembled. Admiral Pierce stood at the center of command, his fists tight as reports flooded in readings that made no sense. Energy spikes, gravity distortions, instruments failing. The image on the screen made every officer fall silent. The leader was no longer a vast shadow. It had grown even larger, its body pulsing with layers of black armor ridges like mountains crawling with streaks of red light, each pulse devouring the glow of distant stars and twisting them into itself. It was becoming something more than a predator. It was becoming a world eater. The Guardian roared a soundless cry that shook the oceans and mountains of Earth, its chest blazing brighter as though it too understood the shift. It lunged without hesitation, slamming into the evolving beast fire, clashing against shadow. The shockwaves splitting debris into dust. Entire fleets spun off course, caught in the tides of their battle. Humans on the ground looked up in horror as the sky rippled like water, the stars flickering and shifting as if reality itself were being torn. The leader retaliated, its coils whipping across space, each strike tearing holes in the void itself, where light vanished forever. The Guardian staggered, one arm blazing as it blocked another strike, but its body dimmed, its wounds mounting its form, trembling for the first time. The Predator's power had grown beyond even the Titan's strength. Human fleets scrambled, firing their new weapons, missiles, glowing railgun slugs bursting with Predator residue. The sky filled with streaks of light slamming into the swarm, tearing holes into lesser predators, but when they struck, the leader, the blasts dissolved into nothing. The black armor absorbed every strike, every missile wasted, every cannon shot swallowed. The creature was adapting faster than humanity could fight. Admiral Pierce slammed his fists into the console, his heart pounding, his voice breaking as he shouted for the ships to keep firing to protect the Guardian, even as deep inside he knew the truth. Their weapons were no longer enough. The leader struck again, its massive coils wrapping around the Guardian, constricting with unbearable force. The Titan's light flickered, sputtered, its body straining like a star about to collapse. Entire cities on Earth fell silent, watching the feed children clutching their parents, billions praying in desperate whispers. Across the world, the Titan that had risen from the deep to protect them now seemed close to falling. Admiral Pierce's voice cut across the calm, steady. Despite the fear choking him, he told his people not to look away, to remember this moment. Because even gods could bleed, and humanity's fight was not over. The Guardian's chest flared dim, then bright, then dim again, as though caught in a struggle within itself, and then with a surge it erupted, a shockwave blasting outward, vaporizing hundreds of smaller predators. The leader shrieked, recoiling but not destroyed. Instead, it twisted, splitting its form into countless coils that reached across the battlefield, shadows spreading like rivers of night, engulfing human fleets one by one. Entire squadrons vanished, as if erased from existence. Commanders screamed last words before static cut them off. Ships imploded, their lights extinguished, leaving only silence and debris. Admiral Pierce gritted his teeth, watching his fleets burn. He refused to break, but he felt the cold realization creep into him. The leader was not simply evolving, it was learning.